we're really trying to prove that you can have a successful, long-term, profitable business by working to benefit all your stakeholders.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Alchemie Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Davis. The Alchemie Podcast explores a happier and healthier future for all. Featuring conversations with thought leaders, scientists, and change makers, we'll explore topics at the intersection of individual wellness, social equity, and sustainability. Join us as we look to bridge the gap between personal, community, and planetary well-being. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. I am beyond excited to welcome here today Andrea Chu, who's one of my dear, dear friends. Andrea believes that building more resilient food systems can solve many of society's challenges and has spent her career working towards just that. She currently serves as the Director of Impact ESG at Vital Farms and supports the company's environmental and social impact strategy. She's worked across the value chain from developing sustainability and responsible sourcing programs at places like Cargill and Campbell Soup Company to influencing food companies with the Environmental Defense Fund to even working directly on farms for a few seasons. She's currently based in DC, loves to cheer on the Philly 76ers, and spends a lot of time with her partner and pup in the off time. Andrea, I'm so excited that you're here today because I know you and I just chit chat about all these things. So it's just going to be fun to do this live with other folks here with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I love that you're talking to many different people about regeneration and a regenerative lifestyle. So
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. No, and I think, like I was saying, it's just really fun you and I have been bantering about this topic for years, I feel like, and it's finally kind of hit the masses in a lot of ways where people are starting to understand the intersectionality or the interconnectivity between our personal wellness and then like the planet and the soil and each other and how it's all connected. And I think this regenerative ag movement is just such a core indicator and to show that people are starting to understand this intersectionality. So it's really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, in thinking about our conversation today, I actually went back to some of our old files from when we worked together and seeing like the OG deck where we're just like, what is regenerative agriculture in that very 101 sense of educating our peers about it? And now you're seeing it on shelf and it's really grown and blown up and it's really cool.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. I mean, before we get into that, because I definitely think we're going to get there, I wanted to kick us off. If you could share a little bit about yourself, who you are professionally as an individual, and ultimately like how you got to where you are today, because it's always fun to hear the journey of folks, just in general in their life. So,
yeah. So I always knew I wanted to work in food. And coming from an Asian household, food is like very much a centerpiece of the day-to-day life and our culture and how we connect with people. And as I kind of went through school, experienced life, there was so much about our food system, like you so aptly put in my bio, that is an intersection of a lot of our societal, social, environmental challenges, but also successes. Like food is just such a central, it's a really concrete, tangible way for people to relate and to understand really big, heady, sometimes feeling insurmountable topics.
yes. I mean, so how did you get there? Like, were you right out of college or right when you were growing up, you knew you wanted to work in food, but like, what was that journey from going to school to where you are today, numbers of years out of university?
Yeah, so I think it was that connection between food and the environment that is what really sold me. I spent my first summer after freshman year of college working on a farm. It was a 2-acre urban farm just outside of Boston with this amazing organization called the Food Project. And what they do is they give teens a job for the summer, working on farms, selling what they grew at farmers markets, and getting to be a part of that. Like I worked with them on the farm and helped coordinate the farmers markets and mobile markets. It gives you purpose, right? And it's such a short supply chain. It's like really instant gratification. Maybe a couple of weeks it takes to grow your parsnip or whatever, but the person is buying it from you. And getting to have that conversation of what are you going to make with this? Or like, why did you choose this today? For what recipe, right? That sort of very direct connection was super, super impactful and kind of just set me on this journey. I didn't know it would end up being like working in impact within a food company. I did a brief stint working in restaurants and not an environment for me, but just getting visibility to how a restaurant does inventory and planning and understanding all of the different dynamics there made me really excited about learning about supply chains writ large and just how we move things around this country, around this world, right?
Mhm.
Uh, is super fascinating. And what are the levers that we could potentially pull to make things better?
Yeah, love it. I mean, it is kind of crazy how global our world is today. Like in a heartbeat, we can have a banana at any time in any season.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously pros and cons to all of that, but I think it's just the food system is so vast beyond even just here where we are and where we live. So yeah, you've had such an incredible career path for someone who's like known you through a lot of this time. And it's been really fun to watch and also just be a small part of that journey with you. But do you mind sharing a little bit more with listeners about your role at Vital Farms and ultimately what the company you're at right now is about? And I say that because I know you and I know a lot about what ESG is or what impact means at companies. But for many folks listening, they may not be as familiar with those types of roles or companies that focus or prioritize these types of things.
absolutely. Vital Farms is a food company that was founded almost 15 years ago by Matt O'Hare, who was a serial entrepreneur and started the company with just 20 Rhode Island red hens on his farm. He knew that there had to be a more ethical, just all in all better way of producing eggs than what was currently out there at the time. And so he started this company. And today we sell pasture raised eggs and butter nationwide in more than 20,000 stores. We have a network of more than 300 farmers, mostly in the Midwest and a little bit east, what we call the pasture belt. And all of our hens are outdoors year round. They are certified humane and ensure that they all have at least 108 square feet of space to roam and do their natural hen thing.
Their natural hen things makes me wonder, what does that look like? I want to be able to fly on the wall in these natural hen habitats.
They love to dust bathe and, just poke around, get their beaks in the dirt, see what fun worms they find. They're really funny social creatures.
Yeah.
And getting out and seeing truly how happy our hens are has been an awesome experience.
Yes. And for you, what do you do? What are you responsible for with your role?
Yeah. So my title as director of impact, we are a B Corp certified company and a public benefit corporation. So the public benefit corporation is our legal designation for how we are supposed to operate as a company. And then our B Corp certified status shows that we meet slash exceed a certain level, a certain social and environmental standard. And my role is more or less to work across the company and make sure we are delivering on our public benefits that we promise to our shareholders and our stakeholders, and continuing to serve all of our stakeholders for the long term.
And what I love about Vital Farms, which is kind of a rare thing to see actually in the market, is that you all are a publicly traded company, public benefit corporation, and certified B Corp, which is very new and really awesome. So I just wanted to nod to that because it's really fantastic.
It is kind of like this grand business experiment and so far we're showing you can do it. But I don't know if there's any. There are a couple out there like Allbirds who are
Mhm.
also B Corp and Public Benefit Corporation, but we're really trying to prove that you can have a successful, long-term, profitable business by working to benefit all your stakeholders.
Yes, which is exactly up the vein of this whole community that we're about to. So, jumping back to regenerative farming, though, I was curious. I know that some folks in this community here might have an idea on what regenerative ag is or regenerative farming, but do you mind sharing a bit more context on what this movement of regenerative farming is really about and what makes it different from other types of farming that's out there?
Kind of regenerative is defined in comparison to conventional farming. And conventional farming is really good at optimizing land use to produce a certain amount of output, right? Whether it's a crop or raise the largest animal. It's really focused on optimizing for that one thing. Whereas regenerative farming is optimizing for a bunch of different things and understanding the relationship. And so one of the ways we talk about it here at Vital Farms is the farm as an ecosystem itself.
Mhm.
So understanding how the land and our hens and water and what's growing in the ground are just a few of the elements in this ecosystem and how they all work together. And again, how they can all benefit each other. And that really is what regenerative farming is understanding the relationships between all these different elements and making sure they stay in balance and thinking about farm as an ecosystem. And then you take one step out further and it's about that community that the farm is in. How does it work within that ecosystem? And then you slowly zoom out to this larger regenerative world we hope to build.
Yes, yes, 100%. I mean, and the other thing too that is often talked about, which we've seen in a lot of media, like Kiss the Ground and a lot of films and content that's coming out around regenerative farming, is that about soil and drawing down soil and the microbiome of the soil. And so I think that's such a unique angle that is talked about very differently in the regenerative movement versus what we've seen in even like the general organic movement or the like conventional farming movement.
Right. Organic is great and has like really grown massively, but it has kind of taken on this sense of we're not no this kind of like free from this rather than what are we adding
Mhm.
to and how are we benefiting the soil.
That's, I think, a movement and a change in how people are thinking about sustainability in general. It's rather than like, what are we like free from or what are we trying to sustain? It's more of like, what are we adding to, like net positive versus net zero? It's like, what are the net positive benefits that we can add to the planet in support of the planet and each other versus what are we just like preventing things from happening? Like, or how are we preventing things from happening, et cetera. So
Yeah, and it's a very conscious mind shift that has to take place. And I'm not saying that's all it is. Like, obviously, there's got to be measurement and data and documentation, but it's not how we as society have functioned before, right? So it is very exciting to see people embrace this idea of regeneration. And I'm going to say this word so much, but just like this long-term thinking
yes.
is really hard for humans, myself included, absolutely. And shifting towards regenerative, whatever it is encouraging us to think beyond just, the short term next week.
Yeah, totally. And I think what's really cool is that, I've actually just went and bought the new organic restorative line this weekend by Vital Farms, which is so cool. And that, you all are starting on this journey of working in the regenerative system or supporting regenerative agriculture practices. But it's, I think, really incredible that we're now starting to see these types of products in store, because for a long time, a lot of these practices were done in a very small scale way. And, to actually drive change that we need to see in the world, we need to scale these types of models such that the biggest players out there can actually put them out into the world and people will purchase and support them. And so, do you mind sharing a little bit more about what this restorative line is about and like what makes it different? And I think it's just a good case study for folks who are trying to delineate like the differences between like a regenerative product versus a non-regenerative product.
So all of our farms require, as I said, all of our farms are required to have their hens be outside all year round, except for very, specific situations. And all of our farms rotate their pasture that our hens are on. So even from that very like core foundation, this idea of rotating our hens from one paddock to the next to allow the soil to regenerate does have some, principles of regenerative agriculture. And so we wanted to see if we push those principles kind of to the max, how could we do this? So we worked really closely with an organization called Understanding Ag, which is founded by Gabe Brown, featured in a lot of Kiss the Ground's work, where he has these principles of regenerative agriculture. And so we picked 4 farms and just kind of focused on each farm as a different ecosystem and saw what each farm needed. So for example, 2 of our farms were a little bit more forested. So the kinds of cover crops we planted were a little bit different. The farmer had some sheep and goats. So they brought them into the pasture rotation to kind of trim back some of the trees and hedges, some of the more kind of woodier items that the hens weren't eating. But for one of our other restorative farms is much more kind of flat pasture. And so we brought in cows. They brought in cows and rotated them on their pasture. So that like integration of different types of livestock, understanding kind of what they will kind of eat in the pasture, what to grow, making sure that there is always something growing, whether it is a clover or just kind of your standard fescue grass to keep the ground covered to reduce soil erosion. Thinking about all these extra practices that a farmer could integrate, kind of, as I said, upping the ante a bit. And that is how we came up with our restorative SKU.
So cool. Like I said, it's like very rare to be able to actually see that language even on shelf today. And it's hard because it's not necessarily regulated yet, right? So like there's a lot of different practices that fall into what is deemed regenerative agriculture. And so like different elements, like you explained, cover cropping or integrating animals and livestock into your rotation, like are all benefits to the soil and to the ecosystem that you're trying to facilitate. But there's not really like a firm standard that is being held by the FDA at this time. But I know that there's stuff being worked on, right?
Correct. And I know that regenerative agriculture activists out there are trying to get it into the Farm Bill or trying to start using that language in like organic standards and things like that. I will say it, as you can tell from my extremely like long-winded response of what is your restorative ag, once you get into like the details, there's a lot to it and it can get technical really fast.
Yes.
And one of the things that I really commend like the team at Vital is making it understandable for consumers and why they should care. And it is that very much, as you mentioned, the microbiome in the soil, that's very tangible, and understanding how that could be good for it's good for the land, it's good for the animals, and you're going to be eating the product of that animal. So it'll be good for you.
Yeah.
One of the key pillars of regenerative agriculture is context matters.
Yes.
What works in the Midwest, even in Missouri, is not going to be the same thing that works just a next state away or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a perfect segue to another question I had, which was, from personal experience and even in my community, as I've worked also in food and try to explain labeling, and it's can be so overwhelming, right? Because you have ethically raised, pasture raised, free range, organic. Now this like regenerative term is being incorporated. Like, do you have any tips and tricks for our listeners here to navigate this ambiguity that they're seeing in store? And like the other layer to think about is that there is some benefit of supporting your local farmers at your farmers market, right? Which may not have the same level of like detailed, claims because they're less worried about that than somebody who's probably selling into big box retail. So I don't know. I'm just curious your perspective on what are some things that we can do to navigate some of all the ambiguity that there is in store for these claims.
Eggs are the perfect example for like labeling gone crazy. So one way that Vital has gotten after this is from third-party certification, knowing that they provide a certain level of standard and trust with consumers. You mentioned how there isn't an FDA-regulated standard for regenerative. There technically isn't a USDA definition for pasture-raised. That's why there is so much like different kinds of labeling you see on the egg shelf. But that's also why we made sure that all of our eggs are certified humane. So there is that standard of understanding what pasture raised is. And with our restorative SKU, we recently actually got third-party certified from an organization called Regenified. And so that's really the soil health element that drives home how we're doing regenerative agriculture for soil. But kind of in the absence of labels, I mean, you're right. A local farmer isn't going to they're too busy, raising the hens to lay the eggs, right? To do that third party verification. And it's really great. You can just ask the farmer selling the eggs about their operation and ask them that question. I think at the end of the day, if you're just a consumer, different things may matter to you at that point in time. Obviously, as I would say for me personally, animal welfare wasn't always a big priority for me until over the last 5 to 10 years. And so I started shopping with that in mind. But other people, price is a totally valid reason to make choices, and probably at the end of the day, what most shoppers make their purchasing decisions on.
I think one of the things that for me has helped is just even when in the egg category, to your point, there's like different amounts of outdoor space that chickens technically have to have or can have to then be called one thing or another. And so free range is one thing, pasture raised means something else, and then regenerative is almost like encompassing more than just outdoor space access. And so just understanding, even if you were to Google it as a takeaway, like what are the differences between pasture raised, free range, and cage free, you'll kind of just see those three. And then restorative or regenerative, I should say, is like adding in the layers of organic on top of access to outdoors.
The housing system.
Yeah.
Yes. And even just like things like outdoor access gets thrown around as well. And
yes,
it's what it is. Just maybe access to outdoors, right?
Maybe a little door to go outdoors.
Yeah.
That maybe don't go outdoors, but they have a door. Yes. Oh man. Okay. Well, in this vein, you and I have talked at length when we just play catch up on like the barriers that our society faces in regards to shifting the food system. So I'm curious from your perspective, like what do you think are some of the barriers or the challenges today for us to get to a place that's more regenerative as we think of food systems and regeneration and intersectionality, interconnection between ourselves and our food and our earth, like that's really what regeneration's about. But there's like a lot of barriers today, I feel like, for us to get from where we are to where we want to go.
There are, where to begin? There are a lot. And I feel like this could quickly spiral into some doom and gloom. One of the biggest challenges that I've been talking to some of our farmers about and some of their neighbors about is really the unaligned incentives for farmers to adopt new practices or to even start the journey to farm regeneratively. There's the kind of social aspect and neighborhood aspect where things like no tilling or putting in cover crops, your farm is going to look different
Yeah.
from your neighbors. It's not going to have the nice, neat rows, and people are going to talk about how it looks ugly and how it might mean that you're a bad farmer. So there's that just like peer to peer element that was just super fascinating to hear about from our farmers. I will honestly say our own processing facility has that challenge where we don't do any landscaping. We let like natural grasses grow. And we've definitely gotten calls from, local city reps or our neighbors being like, "Are you not gonna mow your lawn?" So it is very much like
Who would
what
have thought?
right, it's a perception thing. And just understanding what is good supposed to look like, right? Even in our minds, I think when you think of like a traditional farm, you think of nice, neat core rows.
I feel like if you think about society in general, we put everybody in these little boxes,
Yeah,
and what is deemed good, or what is something supposed to look like. And I think, to your point, farming is not treated any differently. And there's like boxes
right.
that people are put into to be deemed a farmer and what your farm should look like, when there are so many other ways to think about or think differently or do things differently than what is quote unquote good.
Exactly. And then you think about so there's that like kind of this neighborhood social community aspect to it. But then when you get into the economics of farming, that exactly your point of like, this is what good is supposed to look like dictates how farmers get paid out, right? So crop insurance is like the largest one of the largest funding buckets in our farm bill. Billions of dollars of taxpayer money get put into that program. And on the surface, and the history of why crop insurance started is like a very noble one, right? During the Dust Bowl, a lot of farmers lost their crops, and here was an insurance program so that they could continue farming and support their families. However, through the years, they've developed a kind of it's a standard called good agricultural practices, and that's how the insurance companies determine how farmers get paid out. And so a lot of these standards say if you don't apply this level of fertilizer, it's on the part of you as a farmer as a failure, and so you don't get your crop insurance payout. And because that's the reason why you didn't hit your yield, and so that's why you get insurance. But if you're a good farmer and you're building soil health and doing cover cropping and tillage and you have really rich nitrogen rich soils, you don't need to be putting on extra fertilizer. That's just extra cost. But then you get dinged for doing the right thing. And I happened to be driving around with one of our farmers who grows corn and soy, and he was just pointing out to me that field is definitely poorly managed, but he's going to make more money than I do because he's going to get his crop insurance, and then he's going to harvest what he can and still get paid out from that as well.
Wow, that's insane. I mean, it just goes back to demonstrate how important the Farm Bill and how important policy is to help drive so many of these initiatives forward.
And so you can have as many of these, like the Inflation Reduction Act has done incredible work at funding conservation programs and like partnerships for climate smart commodities. There are incredible projects out there that are trying to incentivize good regenerative practices. But when there's other programs out there that are working directly against it, we're not going to see the adoption at the rate we need it to.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And I appreciate you calling that out, because I think more and more, the longer that I work in business, the more I realize how important policy is. And it's like obviously not any one person's job, but I think business needs to do work, policy needs to do work, our communities need to be like advocating for what they want. It's like everyone needs to be engaged in the conversation. And it's just more and more I'm realizing how big of a role though policy plays, and what we as individuals can do to help support that is incredibly important, especially as we talk about climate change in a smaller and smaller time frame. This has been so great, Andrea, and I always kind of like to close out our conversations around looping it back to what we're all about here at Alchemie. And so, whether it's food systems, food labeling, and the really cool brand that you're with currently, Vital, there's just so much to unpack, and I'm sure we'll be revisiting a lot of these topics in future conversations here on the podcast. But in general, what do you think the role of our food systems and food production play in our collective well-being?
Understanding your food system is just, and being curious about it, right? If your take on food is just like, I need it to, do the next thing I need to do, there's something in there for you too around nutrition.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to get the right balance of vitamins to really power yourself throughout the day. There's an entry point for everyone. And I think that's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's also why I've found myself constantly coming back to this regenerative movement too, because it's the food space, regenerative agriculture specifically, is such a great example of how we can think about the collective well-being, which is like our planet, each other and our communities, and then the individual self in the level of like picking the food and eating it too. So there's just so much there that we'll continue to unpack in future sessions. But last question for you is around a call to action. So what are like one or two things our community can do to navigate and support more honest, ethical, regenerative food systems?
So I want to shout out 3 really awesome grassroots food journalism outlets out there that are doing really impressive, both investigative reporting and deep research about a lot of these big food system problems. And they are Civil Eats, Grist, and the Food Environmental Reporting Network. All 3 of them are just doing awesome, and just helps to understand sort of how everything kind of fits together, and how everything you just said, Dana, of policy, business, communities, how they all play with one another to kind of explain where we are. So support those outlets.
Yes, and we will link them in the show bio notes too. But Andrea, thank you so much for coming. This has been so fun and just chit-chatting. I know that we'll have, I'm sure, future opportunities to chat further, because there's just a lot to unpack as we think through regeneration and how it connects back to Alchemie. So thank you so much for being here. It means the world.
Thank you. I mean, I love getting to talk about these topics, and just getting to catch up with you.
Amazing. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon. Thanks for listening to the Alchemie Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation today, you can find more about the speaker in our show notes below. In order to build a global community committed to well-being for all, we need your help. So please rate and subscribe to wherever you're listening from. Finally, we could not do this without the help of our amazing team. A huge thank you and shout out to Lindsay Todd, our producer. All right, y'all, have a lovely, lovely day.